a tale of galactic misunderstandings, bureaucratic nightmares, and the peculiar human tendency to solve problems by creating bigger ones. Captain Zork of the Galactic Federation's diplomatic corps stared at the holographic display, his tentacles twitching with a mixture of confusion and irritation. The human before him, one Ambassador John Smith, because of course that was his name, stood there with a grin that could only be described as infuriatingly smug. "You mean to tell me," Zork gurgled, his speech synthesizer barely keeping up with his exasperation, "that your species actively avoids war because you're too good at it?" John's grin widened. If that was even possible. "Well, Captain, when you put it like that, it sounds a bit silly, doesn't it?" He chuckled, a sound that Zork found both fascinating and deeply unsettling. "But you have to understand, we humans have a bit of a, let's call it a complicated relationship with conflict." Zork's eye stalks swiveled, taking in the rest of the human delegation. They all wore similar expressions of amusement, as if they were all in on some cosmic joke that the rest of the galaxy had yet to understand. It was maddening. Elaborate, Zork demanded, his tentacles coiling around his datapad in what passed for a white-knuckle grip among his species. John cleared his throat, adopting what Zork assumed was meant to be a scholarly pose. "Well, you see, Captain, humans have a long and illustrious history of warfare. We've fought over everything from resources and territory to ideology and religion. Heck, we've even fought wars over buckets." At this, the human delegation burst into laughter. Zork felt a headache coming on, which was impressive considering his species lacked a centralized nervous system. "Buckets?" he asked, immediately regretting the question. "Oh yes," John replied, wiping a tear from his eye. "The War of the Oaken Bucket. Fascinating stuff. But I digress. The point is, we got really good at war. Too good, in fact." Zork's tentacles drooped in resignation. He had a feeling this was going to be a long day. "Continue," he sighed. John nodded, his expression becoming slightly more serious. "You see, Captain, as our technology advanced, so did our capacity for destruction. We reached a point where we realized that if we continued on our warlike path, we'd end up destroying ourselves and probably a good chunk of our planet along with us." "So you stopped fighting wars?" Zork asked, a glimmer of hope in his voice. The human delegation erupted in laughter once again. John shook his head, still chuckling. "Oh no. That would be far too simple for us humans. Instead, we found new and creative ways to channel our competitive nature." Zork braced himself. "Such as?" "Well, for starters, we invented something called sports," John began, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Basically, we take a simple objective, like putting a ball through a hoop or hitting a small object with a stick, and turn it into a complex system of rules, strategies, and physical prowess." "That actually sounds quite reasonable," Zork admitted, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. John's grin turned mischievous. "Oh, but wait, there's more. You see, we didn't stop at just playing these sports. We created entire industries around them. We build massive arenas, form fanatical supporter groups, and wage economic battles over the rights to broadcast these games."
Zork's eye stalks drooped. "I don't understand. How is this different from war?"
"Well, for one thing, there's a lot less death," John replied cheerfully. "Although, depending on which team you support and how the season's going, that might be debatable." The human delegation nodded sagely, as if this was the most profound statement they'd ever heard. Zork felt his patience wearing thin. "But surely, Ambassador, your species must have found other ways to avoid actual warfare." John's expression brightened. "Oh, absolutely. We got very creative. For instance, we invented something called social media." "Social media?" Zork repeated, the unfamiliar term causing his translation matrix to hiccup. "Yes, it's brilliant, really," John enthused. "We created virtual platforms where people can share their thoughts, opinions, and cat pictures with the entire world. It's like a battlefield of ideas, but instead of bullets, we use words, memes, and the occasional GIF." Zork's tentacles curled in confusion. "And this prevents war how?" John leaned in conspiratorially. "Well, you see, Captain, when people are busy arguing about whether a dress is blue and black or white and gold, they have less time to argue about borders and resources." The human delegation nodded in unison, their faces a picture of earnest agreement. Zork felt his headache intensifying. "But surely," Zork pressed, desperate for some semblance of logic, "your leaders must have more substantial methods of maintaining peace." John's eyes twinkled with mirth. "Oh, of course, we have an entire system dedicated to it. We call it international diplomacy." Zork perked up. Finally, something that sounded sensible. Ah yes, a forum for rational discussion and negotiation between nations. We have something similar in the Galactic Federation. John's laugh echoed through the chamber. Oh, my dear Captain, you give us far too much credit. Our version of international diplomacy is, well, let's just say it's unique. Zork braced himself. How so? Well, for starters, we have this wonderful institution called the United Nations, John began, his tone dripping with sarcasm. It's where all the countries of Earth come together to discuss important issues, make grand declarations, and then proceed to ignore everything they just agreed upon. Zork's tentacles twisted in bewilderment. But what's the point of that? John shrugged. Excellent question. Some say it's to give the illusion of progress. Others argue it's an elaborate way to justify expensive dinners and cocktail parties. Personally, I think it's just so we can all feel important while accomplishing absolutely nothing. The human delegation nodded sagely, as if this was the height of wisdom. Zork felt his grasp on reality slipping. But surely, he sputtered, there must be some actual mechanism for preventing conflicts. John's eyes lit up. Oh, absolutely. We have something called mutually assured destruction. It's quite ingenious, really. Zork leaned forward, hopeful. That sounds promising. How does it work? Well, you see, John explained, his tone eerily cheerful, we built weapons so powerful that using them would not only destroy our enemies, but also ourselves and possibly the entire planet. So naturally, everyone is too scared to use them. Zork stared at the human in horror. You created weapons that could destroy your entire species as a peacekeeping measure. John beamed. Exactly. Isn't it brilliant? The human delegation applauded, apparently impressed by their own species' insanity. Zork felt his tentacles go limp with shock. But what if someone actually uses these weapons, he asked, dreading the answer. John waved a hand dismissively. Oh, we have safeguards for that. Multiple layers of bureaucracy, complex launch codes, and a system that requires at least 2 people to agree before anything happens. It's foolproof. Zork's eye stalk swiveled to take in the nodding human delegation. They all seemed perfectly at ease with this madness. He wondered, not for the first time, if he was the victim of an elaborate prank. Ambassador, Zork said slowly, trying to process the insanity he was hearing, are you telling me that your species' approach to avoiding war is to make it so horrifically destructive that no one in their right mind would consider it? John's grin was blinding. Now you're getting it. But wait, there's more. Zork groaned internally. More. Of course, John exclaimed, his enthusiasm seemingly boundless. You see, we realized that all this tension and potential for global annihilation was a bit stressful. So we came up with even more ways to channel our aggressive tendencies. Zork braced himself. Such as? Well, there's the global economy, for starters, John began, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Instead of fighting over physical resources, we created this wonderfully complex system of numbers that go up and down based on factors no one fully understands. We call it the stock market. Zork's tentacles twitched in confusion. And this prevents war. John nodded enthusiastically. Oh, absolutely. You see, when countries are too busy trying to manipulate abstract financial concepts, they have less time to plot invasions. Plus, it gives our smartest minds something to do other than invent new ways to blow things up. The human delegation murmured in agreement, as if this was the most logical thing in the world. Zork felt his grasp on sanity slipping further. But surely, he pressed, desperate for some semblance of reason, there must be times when conflicts arise, despite all these measures. John's expression turned serious for a moment. Oh, of course, we're not perfect after all. But that's where our most ingenious invention comes into play. Zork leaned forward, both dreading and curious about what could possibly top the insanity he'd heard so far. And that is bureaucracy, John announced with a flourish. Zork blinked his eye stalks rapidly. Bureaucracy? Exactly. John's enthusiasm was back in full force. You see, we've created this wonderfully complex system of rules, regulations, and paperwork that makes it nearly impossible to do anything quickly or efficiently, including going to war. The human delegation nodded sagely, apparently impressed by their own genius. Zork felt his tentacles curl in disbelief. Let me get this straight, he said slowly. You've made your own government system so inefficient that they can't even efficiently wage war. John beamed. Now you're getting it. It's brilliant, isn't it? By the time all the necessary forms are filled out, approvals are obtained, and committees have convened to discuss the possibility of forming a subcommittee to explore the potential ramifications of considering the option of me be thinking about the prospect of war. The conflict has usually resolved itself, or everyone's forgotten what they were fighting about in the first place. Zork stared at the human, his mind reeling. But what about emergencies? Surely you have systems in place for rapid response. John's laugh echoed through the chamber. Oh, my dear Captain, you clearly underestimate the power of human bureaucracy. We once had a meeting to discuss the urgent need for faster emergency response times. It took 3 years to schedule. The human delegation chuckled appreciatively, as if this was something to be proud of. Zork felt his headache evolving into a full-blown migraine. But he sputtered, his speech synthesizer struggling to keep up with his confusion. How do you accomplish anything? Oh, John's grin turned sly. That, my dear Captain, is the beauty of it. We don't. At least not on a large scale. But here's the clever bit. While our governments are tied up in red tape, our individual citizens are free to innovate, create, and solve problems on their own. Zork's eye stalks perked up slightly. That actually sounds somewhat reasonable. Oh, it is, John agreed enthusiastically. You see, we humans have this wonderful ability to create solutions to problems that don't exist yet, while completely ignoring the pressing issues right in front of us. It's how we ended up with self-driving cars before we figured out how to achieve world peace. The human delegation nodded in unison, apparently seeing nothing wrong with this statement. Zork felt his tentacles droop in resignation. So, he said slowly, trying to summarize the madness he'd heard, your species avoids war by being too good at it, creating weapons too horrible to use, inventing complex economic systems no one understands, and making your own governments too inefficient to function. John's grin was blinding. Exactly. And don't forget the sports and social media. They're crucial to the whole system. Zork stared at the human for a long moment, his mind racing. Finally, he asked the question that had been nagging at him since the beginning of this bizarre conversation. But why? Why go through all this trouble instead of just not fighting? John's expression turned thoughtful, a change that Zork found both refreshing and slightly terrifying. Well, Captain, I suppose it's because we humans have a rather complicated relationship with conflict. We abhor it, yet we're fascinated by it. We strive for peace, yet we thrive on competition. We dream of a harmonious future, yet we can't help but prepare for the worst. He paused, his eyes taking on a distant look. In a way, all these convoluted systems and safeguards are our way of channeling our conflicting nature into something, well, if not productive, at least less destructive. Zork found himself nodding slowly, a grudging understanding beginning to dawn. I think I'm starting to see. Your species is essentially at war with its own nature. John's laugh was softer this time, tinged with a hint of melancholy. That's not a bad way of putting it, actually. We're constantly battling between our better angels and our baser instincts. All these systems, as ridiculous as they might seem, are our way of trying to keep the balance. For the first time since the conversation began, Zork felt a glimmer of respect for the strange, contradictory species before him. That's actually quite profound, Ambassador. John's grin returned, but this time it seemed more genuine. Well, don't let it get out. We humans have a reputation for being ridiculous to maintain, after all. Zork's tentacles waved in what passed for a chuckle among his species. Indeed, though I must admit your methods, while unorthodox, seem to be effective. Your species has managed to avoid large-scale conflicts for some time now, correct? John nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and caution. For the most part, yes. We still have our squabbles and regional conflicts, of course. We wouldn't be human without them. But we've managed to avoid the kind of global catastrophes that we're so terrifyingly capable of. Zork found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious now. And how do you see the future of your species in terms of conflict resolution? John's eyes twinkled with mischief. Well, Captain, now that we've made contact with the galactic community, we're looking forward to exporting our unique brand of chaos, diplomacy, to the stars. The human delegation cheered, apparently excited by the prospect of confusing the entire galaxy. Zork felt a wave of sympathy for his fellow diplomats across the cosmos. I see, Zork said slowly, his tentacles curling in what he hoped was a diplomatic gesture. And what exactly would that entail? John's grin turned positively impish. Oh, you know, the usual. We'll probably start by introducing the concept of intergalactic sports leagues. Can you imagine the excitement of a Milky Way vs Andromeda cricket match? Zork blinked his eye stalks rapidly. Cricket? Is that some sort of advanced weapon system? The human delegation burst into laughter, leaving Zork feeling distinctly out of the loop. John wiped a tear from his eye before responding. "Oh no, my dear Captain. It's a sport. One that can last for 5 days and still end in a draw. Trust me, once we introduce that to the galaxy, everyone will be too confused to even think about war." Zork felt his headache returning with a vengeance. "And this is your idea of promoting peace?" John nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. Nothing brings species together like shared bewilderment. But don't worry, that's just the beginning. We've got plans for galactic social media platforms, interstellar bureaucratic systems, and of course a pan-galactic economy based entirely imaginary numbers and the perceived value of rare memes." The human delegation nodded in unison, their faces a picture of earnest excitement. Zork found himself wondering, not for the first time, if his universal translator was malfunctioning. "Ambassador," Zork said slowly, trying to process the insanity he was hearing. "Are you suggesting that your strategy for maintaining galactic peace is to confuse everyone into submission?" John's eyes lit up with delight. "Confusion, my dear Captain, is just the beginning. Think of it as a sort of galactic vaccination against conflict. We introduce a little bit of chaos, a smidge of absurdity, and before you know it, the entire cosmos is too busy trying to figure out the rules of cricket or debating the value of rare PP memes to even consider war." Zork's tentacles drooped in resignation. "And your government approves of this strategy?" The human delegation exchanged glances, barely containing their laughter. John cleared his throat, adopting an exaggeratedly serious expression. "Well, Captain, as per Section 42, Subsection B, Paragraph 17 of the Earth's Intergalactic Relations Protocol, I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of any official strategy for galactic peacekeeping through confusion and mild annoyance." Zork blinked his eye stalks rapidly. Is that an actual protocol?" John's grin was positively impish. "Maybe. Or maybe I just made it up. The beauty of bureaucracy is that it's often impossible to tell the difference." The human delegation nodded sagely, as if this was the height of diplomatic wisdom. Zork felt his grasp on reality slipping further. "But surely," he pressed, desperate for some semblance of logic, "there must be more substantial plans for maintaining peace in the galaxy." John's expression turned thoughtful. "Well, of course, we humans are nothing if not thorough in our approach to avoiding conflict. For instance, we're planning to introduce the concept of galactic holidays." Zork perked up slightly. "Holidays? That sounds relatively harmless." John's laugh echoed through the chamber. "Oh, my dear Captain, you clearly underestimate the human capacity for turning even the most innocent concepts into tools of mass distraction. Imagine, if you will, a galaxy-wide celebration of Talk Like a Pirate Day." Zork's tentacles curled in confusion. I don't understand. What's a pirate, and why would anyone want to talk like one?" The human delegation erupted into enthusiastic "Error. As an ahoy, matey." Complete with exaggerated hand gestures that Zork assumed were meant to mimic these pirates. He felt his headache intensifying. John, still grinning, continued, "You see, Captain, the beauty of it is that it doesn't matter if anyone understands. The point is to get everyone so caught up in the absurdity of it all that they forget about their differences and just enjoy the shared experience of confusion." Zork's eye stalks drooped. "And this is how you plan to maintain peace?" "It's just one tool in our arsenal of absurdity," John replied cheerfully. "We've got plans for intergalactic flash mobs, cosmic meme wars, and let's not forget the piece de resistance, a galactic version of our most confusing and pointless Earth sport, golf." To the human delegation cheered, apparently thrilled by the prospect of spreading their most baffling pastimes across the cosmos. Zork felt a wave of sympathy for the unsuspecting species of the galaxy. But what about actual diplomacy?" Zork sputtered, clinging to the last shreds of his sanity. "Surely you have plans for formal negotiations, treaties, cultural exchanges?" John's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Oh, absolutely. In fact, we're planning to introduce our most effective form of diplomacy to the galactic stage, potlucks." Zork blinked his eye stalks rapidly. "Potlucks?" "Yes," John exclaimed, his enthusiasm seemingly boundless. "It's a gathering where everyone brings a dish to share. Though nothing brings species together like the shared experience of trying to politely eat something that might be food but could just as easily be decorative pottery." The human delegation nodded enthusiastically, apparently seeing this as the pinnacle of interspecies relations. Zork felt his tentacles curl in bewilderment. "Ambassador," he said slowly, "I must admit, I'm having difficulty understanding how all of this chaos could possibly lead to lasting peace." John's expression softened slightly. "Ah, but that's where you're missing the point, my dear Captain. You see, we humans have learned something crucial about peace. It's not about the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding." Zork found himself leaning forward, intrigued despite himself. "Go on." "All these seemingly ridiculous ideas, the sports, the holidays, the potlucks, they're not just distractions," John explained, his tone surprisingly earnest. "They're opportunities for different species to come together, to share experiences, to laugh at the same jokes, and puzzle over the same absurdities. And in those shared moments of joy or confusion or simple camaraderie, we begin to see each other not as aliens or potential enemies, but as fellow sentient beings, all trying to make sense of this crazy cosmos." Zork felt a glimmer of understanding beginning to dawn. So all this chaos is actually a way of fostering empathy and common ground. John's smile was genuine this time. "Exactly. After all, it's hard to consider someone an enemy when you're both equally baffled by the rules of cricket, or trying to figure out if that wiggling purple thing on your plate is a delicacy or a decorative centerpiece." For the first time since the conversation began, Zork felt a grudging respect for the strange, contradictory species before him. "That's actually quite clever, Ambassador." "Unorthodox, certainly, but clever." John's grin widened. "Why, thank you, Captain. We do try. Of course, this is all assuming we can get the galactic community to go along with our particular brand of madness." Zork's tentacles waved in what passed for a chuckle among his species. "After this conversation, Ambassador, I have a feeling that resisting the spread of human chaos across the galaxy would be an exercise in futility." The human delegation cheered, apparently taking this as a compliment. John bowed with a flourish. "We do our best to be an irresistible force of benevolent anarchy, Captain. It's kind of our thing." As the meeting drew to a close, Zork found himself both dreading and anticipating the changes that humanity's entrance into the galactic community would bring. One thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. As he watched the human delegation depart, chattering excitedly about introducing extraterrestrial species to the concept of prank calls and rickrolling, Zork made a mental note to stock up on headache remedies. Something told him that the age of human-induced galactic chaos was just beginning. And yet, as he reflected on the bizarre conversation he'd just had, Zork couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps these strange, contradictory, endearingly insane humans were onto something. After all, in a galaxy full of cricket matches, pirate-speak holidays, and interspecies potlucks, who would have time for war? With a resigned wave of his tentacles, Zork set off to prepare his report for the Galactic Federation. He had a feeling it was going to be a long, confusing, but undeniably interesting future. As he walked away, he could have sworn he heard one of the humans shout, "Don't forget to tell them about our plan for a galactic-wide game of hide and seek." Zork quickened his pace, his tentacles curling in what might have been amusement or terror. Probably both. The galaxy, it seemed, was in for quite a ride. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of space, the concept of war was scratching its metaphorical head, wondering how it had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by a species that considered the Macarena a valid form of interstellar communication. Welcome to the future, where peace is maintained not through force or fear, but through a carefully orchestrated symphony of benevolent chaos, conducted by the maestros of madness themselves, humanity. May the cosmos have mercy on us all, or at least may it bring snacks to the next intergalactic potluck. After all, nothing says we come in peace quite like a slightly burnt casserole and a willingness to laugh at ourselves. And so, as the human delegation boarded their ship, ready to spread their unique brand of diplomacy across the stars, the galaxy braced itself for an era of peace through perpetual confusion. It wasn't the future anyone had expected, but then again, with humans involved, when had anything ever gone according to plan? The end, or perhaps just the beginning of a very strange, very human adventure in galactic peacekeeping.